Murky blue-gray ice stretches to the horizon like a colossal shield of the Northern Ocean, with the small Viking ship Gullfaxi trapped and dwarfed by the thick frozen mass. For 4 weeks they have hacked at the ice with axes and crowbars, every crack they open freezing shut again, thicker and harder under the brutal cold. Freya stands on the deck, calloused hands rubbing together, sea frost crusted on her messy braids, eyes fixed on the freezing mist that shrouds the horizon. Håkon, tall with an ice-flecked beard, faces Freya, his dry voice warning of dwindling supplies and accusing her of leading them into a dead land. In the cramped, dim, damp hold, Freya opens the former captain's chest, rummaging through yellowed charts until her hand finds a small parchment scroll sealed with black wax. Freya unfurls the scroll, a rough hand-drawn chart covered in runes, the south marked by a huge spiral labeled Vortex Yggdrasil, beside it a sea serpent sketched in dried blood. A dry, cracking sound echoes from beneath the keel. The hull shivers, and Freya trembles as if sensing something enormous stirring under the ice. Clutching the scroll, Freya rushes up to the deck, shouting for everyone to stop breaking the ice and check the hull, her face taut with warning. A deep black fissure rips across the ice from starboard to mid-deck. The dim light darkens as the shadow of a huge, scaled creature glides beneath the frozen surface. Håkon drops his axe, eyes wide with terror, while Freya grips her sword hilt, ready to face the awakened monster beneath the ice. After the piercing shriek and the crack in the ice, all thoughts of rebellion vanish, leaving only fear. Torsten trembles as he asks Freya what the creature is, while the black fissure behind them slowly freezes shut like a closing wound. Freya looks down at the refreezing crack, exhales a white plume of breath, and says they have drifted into Langvísa, the forgotten cold waters named long ago by the seers. Freya spreads the parchment on the deck and ties down its corners so the wind cannot take it. The sailors gather around her, their eyes a mix of doubt and curiosity as they stare at the spiral of Vortex Yggdrasil on the map. Freya points to the spiral and the serpent drawing, telling of an ice creature, a descendant of Jörmungandr. Håkon reels back, face pale, calling it the curse that killed the Jarl. In the days that follow, Freya orders the rations cut to the bare minimum. Dried fish and salted meat are divided into tiny portions, just enough to keep a flicker of warmth in their bodies. They dismantle part of the cargo hold, using the wood to feed small fires, just enough to melt ice for drinking water and warm a small corner of the ship. Freya gives the old blacksmith Fjol a rune stone carved with Tyr's symbol, asking him to melt it and fuse it into a spearhead, turning it into a magical weapon against the serpent's scales. While Freya prepares the weapon, Håkon and a few sailors remain doubtful, drilling a hole in the ice to fish or hunt seals, searching for their own way out. The sea serpent strikes a second time. The ice beneath Håkon explodes, sending him and 2 others into the black water. A slick gray-blue shape snatches one sailor and drags him under. Håkon is hauled back onto the deck, soaked and shaking, describing the creature's scales as hard as stone and cold as death, while the hole in the ice behind him begins to freeze over unnaturally fast. Freya looks at the utterly broken Håkon, then raises the parchment high and declares they have only 2 choices: lie down and die, or trust the map and fight back against their hunter. That night, under the dim survival fire, Fjol finishes the spear Gungnir of Ice. Freya takes it, feeling a cold surge of energy run up her arm, joined by the fierce resolve to hunt the monster. After the sudden attack and Torsten's death, the mood aboard the Gullfaxi shifts from despair to high alert. Every crack of ice, every whistling gust makes the crew hold their breath, bracing for another strike. The siege begins. Jötunnsnar no longer merely lurks in the dark. It has learned that hiding is useless, and now it attacks with brutal under-ice shockwaves. On the first night of the siege, the Gullfaxi shakes violently as heavy blows strike from beneath the ice, sending shockwaves that destroy makeshift shields and awnings and even snap a spare mast in 2. On the second night, Jötunnsnar rises, its massive head breaking the frozen surface, golden eyes blazing, steel-like scales gleaming, its breath a freezing mist that coats everything it touches in thick ice. Freya screams for fire and shields, ordering the crew to block the icy haze. Anyone touched by the mist feels bone-deep pain, their flesh burning with cold. Amid the chaos, Freya studies the beast's path. It always circles, drifting south, then returning from the north, carefully avoiding the starboard side of the ship in a strange, deliberate pattern. Håkon, now fully under Freya's command, joins the crew in hurling embers and hot metal onto the ice, carving glowing red scars that form a temporary barrier against the living frost. On the third day, Freya, Fjol, and Håkon withdraw to the captain's cabin, Freya spreads the vortex map on the table, sets a small axe on the ship's current position, and explains that Vortex Yggdrasil is a massive underwater conduit where hot and cold currents collide. When Fjoll asks why the creature fears the vortex, Freya explains that Jötunnsnar does not fear the whirlpool itself, but change. If the vortex runs at full power, it will drag the serpent into the deep where it loses all control. Freya walks to starboard, feeling a different tremor beneath her feet. She realizes the ship is anchored right at the edge of the vortex, and the serpent is using the Gullfaxi itself as a pivot to maintain the siege. Back inside, they realize the vortex is their only weapon. But to trigger it, they must break the protective ice on the starboard side with immense heat, a force that can only come from burning the ship's own hull. Freya rises, takes up Gungnir of Ice, and orders the largest timbers made ready to burn their escape, using heat to lure the serpent in and the whirlpool to destroy it. As Freya and Hakon return to the deck, the pale white sunlight has nearly faded, cold fog shrouding everything. Jötunnsnar does not appear, but a long low hiss echoes as if coming from the ice itself beneath their feet. They realize the monster is tunneling under the ice, creeping closer inch by inch. The final confrontation is drawing near, like a colossal shadow crawling just beneath their feet. In the cargo hold, heavy with the smell of salt and rotten wood, Hakon repeats Freya's plan, calling the idea of burning their own escape madness. If the fire isn't strong enough, they will lose the ship and still remain trapped. Freya checks the sharp axe blade, saying that if they don't act, they lose everything, and that the Gullfaxi must be turned from a trap into a spear to strike the monster. They begin the plan, cutting through the starboard deck, stripping non-load-bearing timbers, piling furs and animal fat into the pit, turning it into a fire chamber meant to melt the ice shielding the vortex. Fjoll carefully removes support beams, each hammer blow ringing harshly in the tense silence. The sailors are no longer just waiting for death, but preparing for a war ritual. For 3 days they toil to exhaustion, snatching short naps and swallowing bits of dried fish, the constant threat beneath them keeping everyone on edge. As they work, Freya tells of Odin sacrificing an eye for knowledge, of warriors choosing glorious death. She says they too are sacrificing part of the ship to purchase a chance at survival. By the third night, the pit is ready, a wide black hole ringed with oil-soaked dry wood, a gaping wound in the ship's body waiting to ignite. Before acting, Freya tells Fjoll they need warriors' blood to seal the vow and feed the flames. By tradition, they must use their own blood for such a ritual and weapon. Freya cuts her palm, letting blood drip onto Gungnir's tip and then into the dark pit. Hakon and each sailor follows, turning the act into a blood oath of survival. As the last drop falls, Freya closes her eyes and feels the outside cold recede slightly, pushed back by the heat of their belief and sacrifice. At midnight, thick fog blankets the ship. Freya stands by the pit, holding a blazing torch, while below Hakon and 2 others wait ready with axes and spears. Freya lifts her gaze to the black sky, calls upon the gods, declares they offer the ship's survival in exchange for a chance to fight, then taunts Jötunnsnar. "You thirst for heat? We will give you heat." She hurls the torch into the pit, flames roar to life at once, catching the grease and dry wood. Thick smoke billowing upward as heat spreads and ice around the hull groans and begins to melt. Beneath the ice, wild agitation erupts. Stronger blows slam the hull. Then a drawn-out roar as Jötunnsnar surges in, drawn to the massive heat like a rare feast. On deck, Freya turns to Hakon with a cold smile and says, "It's here. Get ready, Hakon. Fight like Vikings who have sworn by blood." The blaze from the gutted hold erupts like a mad beacon in the frozen night, staining the fog red. Under its terrible heat, the starboard ice groans as if roaring while it breaks apart. Then Jötunnsnar appears, shattering the broken ice, its colossal serpent body sheathed in basalt-like scales and spines of ice along its back as it erupts amid a spray of shattered ice and water, staring straight at the flames. It gapes its fanged jaws, not to bite but to unleash its breath. A dense white blast of frost surges toward the bow, freezing wood in an instant until it splits 4 sailors at the front, encased and shattered in merciless ice. Freya yells for them to fall back and dodge the breath. She raises a water-soaked wooden shield to block the freezing spray while the fire behind them forms a thin wall of warmth between them and the killing cold. Jötunnsnar lashes its massive body against the hull, a thunderous crack, like lightning splitting timber as the Gullfaxi lurches hard, nearly flinging everyone off onto the slick ice. Freya, Håkon, and Fjol charge into close combat. Håkon hurls a heated axe at the monster's eye, but it bounces off its hardened scales, serving only to enrage the serpent further. As Jötunnsnar opens its jaws wide to bite down on the deck where Freya stands, she spots its weakness. A stretch of gray-red, soft inner flesh exposed deep in its throat, the one fragile patch between her and the beast's heart. At that moment, the ice beneath starboard shatters. A vast slab collapses and Vortex Yggdrasil awakens, turning the Black Sea into a howling whirlpool that drags the burning ship and Jötunnsnar's lower body into its mad spin. The serpent loses its balance, roaring in panic as it's torn from its safe domain. Freya screams, "Now or never!" and uses the ship's tilting spin to launch herself toward its gaping jaws. Freya is no longer merely a navigator but a shield maiden. She barrels through burning planks and freezing mist, pouring all her remaining strength into driving Gungnir of Ice into the exposed gap in Jötunnsnar's throat as it roars. The rune spear punches through flesh, and eerie blue light erupts from the rune stone as it meets blood. Rune magic and the beast's iceborne power clash, unleashing a blazing surge inside its throat. Jötunnsnar screams in unimaginable agony as cold black blood jets out like a fountain. It thrashes wildly, but the vortex's pull twists its massive body and slowly drags it down into the churning dark. A terrifying silence falls once the serpent's body vanishes. Vortex Yggdrasil slowly calms, its spinning waters easing as if having completed its task and returned to slumber. Freya collapses onto the deck, battered and spent, yet still gazing ahead. The sound of ice cracking is no longer a threat but a release as the vast sheets around the Gullfaxi split apart, opening channels toward the free ocean. The battle is over. The Gullfaxi still smolders but is no longer shackled by ice or monster. Before it lie dark channels of water leading to the open sea and an unwritten future. A near-deafening silence settles. The last thunder of cracking ice has faded. The flames on the deck reduced to smoldering embers. The Gullfaxi is scorched on one side, her hull fractured and riding low in the water, with only 10 exhausted, wounded sailors left alive. Freya forces herself up amid charred planks and thawing ice, her arm numb from the final thrust and her flesh burning from frostbite. Yet her eyes are clear as she sees Håkon shaking but alive. "We did it," Håkon whispers, a respect he's never shown before burning in his eyes as he looks at Freya. "It's gone." The deadly cold that once gripped these waters begins to recede. With Jötunnsnar gone, Vortex Yggdrasil calms, the temperature edges upward, and the vast ice sheets around the Gullfaxi melt, trickling and cracking in a murmured song of release. Over the next 3 days, the survivors turn grief into strength. Freya, Håkon, and Fjol lead the patching of the hull with shields and planks, while Fjol tirelessly reforges rivets and repairs the broken rudder. As the ice melts and open water returns, they can fish and hunt seals more easily. Fresh meat and hot fat help their bodies recover quickly from weeks of hunger and cold. Their spirits have changed. Doubt and fear are gone. Freya no longer needs to command. They follow her out of absolute trust, for she has saved them from the cold and from dying in shame. Freya finds Gungnir of Ice again, the spear tip intact, but its runestone cracked with a thin fissure. The steel now a deeper blue-black as if it has absorbed Jötunnsnar's cold. She puts it away as a testament to their redemption. On the 4th morning, the first sunlight in weeks pierces the fog, touching the deck with warmth and making the charred scars and melted ice gleam with golden light. The Gullfaxi, burned and whole yet unbroken, is ready to sail once more. Her crude patches and scarred mast now stand as symbols of stubborn survival. Freya stands at the steering position, gazing back at the sea that once imprisoned them. No more ice, no more monsters shriek, only the vast ocean. She is no longer a doubted navigator, but the Jarl of Survival. Håkon stands beside her, drapes a heavy cloak over her shoulders and asks, "Where do we go, Freya?" His voice steady, stripped of rebellion, filled only with trust. Freya smiles, radiant and weary. She looks south where the ocean opens and says, "We go home, Håkon. We carry this story with us, the tale of Vikings who fought the World Serpent and won." She lays her hand on the steering oar. The torn sail still fills with wind, carrying the Gullfaxi through the dark channels of water, out of the cursed sea and toward a new voyage. The journey ahead is long and fraught with danger, but after facing their greatest fear and surviving, they no longer tremble. Only the wind, the sea, and a story waiting to be told by future fires remain.